before the Zohar crystallized into doctrine, before Kabbalah became a system of numbered emanations, before angels received their fixed names and hierarchies hardened into cosmic bureaucracy, there existed a map, not a metaphor, not a teaching device, a map of ascent. 7 heavens, layered chambers, guarded thresholds where passage was never guaranteed, where the unprepared did not merely fail, they burned, they shattered. They returned broken, if they returned at all. The Hekhalot texts do not invite, they warn. They describe ascent through veils of fire, through silence so absolute it devours sound before it forms, through radiance that does not illuminate but blinds, tests, refuses. They speak of beings who do not teach, who do not guide, who permit passage or deny it according to laws older than language itself. The 7 heavens were not destinations for the faithful. They were not promises of reward. They were cosmic permissions embedded in the structure of reality itself. Thresholds that existed whether humanity acknowledged them or not. Permissions that could be requested, never demanded, never assumed. This is not the heaven of doctrine, not the paradise of belief. This is the heaven of encounter, where proximity to the divine is not comfort but pressure, where each ascending chamber strips away another layer of illusion until only the irreducible remains. The map still exists, not above, within the architecture of what is. The texts emerged in the shadow of catastrophe. Late Second Temple Judaism, the priesthood functioning, the sacrificial system intact, the cosmic order seemingly stable. The temple stood, the rituals continued, the sacrifices rose, as smoke toward heaven daily. But beneath that stability, certain scribes, certain priests who served in the inner courts, where only the initiated could enter, began recording visions that did not fit the prophetic mold. These were not messages from God delivered through intermediaries, transmitted through angel or dream or burning bush. These were accounts of direct ascent, of souls departing flesh, passing through celestial boundaries, approaching the throne itself without mediation, without buffer, without the protective distance prophecy provided. They called these texts Hekhalot, palaces, chambers, not because heaven resembled earthly architecture, but because the word captured what could not be captured otherwise: enclosure, boundary, progression through sealed spaces. Each heaven a palace, each palace a test. The language of architecture applied to that which has no physical form, because human language possesses no other vocabulary for describing layered progression through zones of increasing intensity. Merkabah mysticism grew from these visions. Merkabah, the chariot throne glimpsed by Ezekiel in his vision by the river Chebar, surrounded by living creatures of fire and wheels within wheels, eyes covering every surface, wings that moved without turning. The throne became the focal point, the ultimate chamber, the 7th heaven, where proximity reached its maximum sustainable intensity, where divine presence did not speak but simply was, and that being itself, that naked existence without attribute or quality, was more than mortal consciousness could contain without shattering. These were not public teachings. They could not be. The texts themselves warn repeatedly of danger, of mystics who ascended unprepared and descended mad, their minds broken by what they had witnessed, of those who mistook one heaven for the final chamber and presumed entry, only to be consumed by guardians who do not forgive error, who cannot forgive error, because they are not moral agents but structural necessities, of those who spoke the wrong names at the wrong thresholds and found every door sealed against them forever, not from punishment, but from the immutable operation of cosmic law. The Hekhalot literature operated under a singular premise. The seven heavens function as the structural map of divine proximity. They operate according to laws that predate human awareness of them. Those laws can be learned. The structure can be approached. But learning them requires more than study, more than memorization of formulae or repetition of sacred names. It requires transformation of the vessel that would contain such knowledge. The mystic must become capable of withstanding what the map describes. Secrecy dominated these texts, not from paranoia, but from necessity. Not from desire to hoard power, but from recognition of what happens when knowledge is transmitted without capacity. The map was dangerous. The ascent was real. And reality, when approached directly, resists the unprepared absolutely, without mercy, without exception. The first heaven, atmospheric boundary, where earthly gravity begins to lose its claim. Here the laws of incarnate existence start to bend. The guardian stands at the threshold, nameless in the texts, but present. A boundary condition made conscious. Permission is granted or denied according to purity of intent, though the texts never specify how that purity is measured. The mystic passes or does not pass. There is no appeal. The second heaven, where celestial bodies manifest their intelligences, not the physical sun and moon and stars visible from Earth, but their interior powers, the animating principles behind luminosity itself. Here, language begins to fail. Descriptions become formulaic, repetitive, because human cognition cannot yet parse what it encounters. The mystic learns silence. The third heaven. Paradise appears in fragments of later tradition, but in the original Hekhalot system, this chamber is not rest. It is intensification. Fire becomes visible, not as element but as presence. The guardian here does not speak. It radiates law. The mystic must match that radiation or be expelled, not by force, but by incompatibility. Reality itself rejects what does not resonate with its frequency. The fourth heaven, the texts grow sparse. This chamber resists description more than the previous three. What survives suggests a zone of music, not sound as heard by ears, but the mathematical ratios underlying cosmic order made audible to transformed perception. Harmonies that precede matter, proportions that generate space itself. The mystic who reaches this threshold has ceased to be merely human. Something else has begun. The fifth heaven. Angelic hierarchies become visible, though not as individuals, as functions, as modes of divine law expressing through multiplicity. The guardian is no longer singular. The threshold is patrolled by orders, seraphim in some accounts, though the names vary and the texts warn against trusting names alone. What matters is not identity but intensity. Each order channels a frequency of divine will. The ascending mystic must demonstrate capacity to sustain that frequency without dissolution. The sixth heaven, throne proximity, begins. The texts use the word before, standing before the throne, though not yet at it. The difference matters absolutely. At this level, divine presence is no longer mediated through intermediaries or symbolic representation. It presses directly upon consciousness. The mystic experiences not vision but pressure, not revelation but weight. The throne is close enough to see, too close to approach without final preparation. The seventh heaven, the Merkabah itself. The chariot throne surrounded by living fire and wheels of eyes and wings, covering faces, because even celestial beings cannot endure the full radiance. This is not a place. It is a state of maximum sustainable proximity to that which cannot be approached, but toward which all approach tends. Here the mystic does not receive teaching, does not gain knowledge, becomes knowledge, or ceases entirely. The accounts that survive speak of return as more difficult than ascent, re-entry into flesh as traumatic as the original departure. The seven heavens are not stages of moral improvement, not symbols of spiritual virtue. They are zones of increasing ontological intensity. Each heaven a calibration, each threshold a test of structural integrity. Reality arranged in layers according to how much divine presence consciousness can contain before it shatters. The Hermetic reader recognizes a resonance the purely religious interpreter might miss. The seven heavens mirror planetary intelligences. Not planets as physical bodies orbiting the sun, planets as principles, as modes of cosmic order descending through increasingly dense manifestation. The seven classical planets, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, each governing a sphere of influence, each radiating a particular quality of intelligence through the architecture of creation. The mystic's ascent reverses that descent. What came down through progressive densification might be climbed back up through progressive refinement. Each heaven strips away another layer of particularity, another limitation imposed by manifestation in form. The guardian at each threshold operates as the intelligence of that sphere itself, the consciousness that maintains that particular frequency of cosmic law. Ascent becomes alignment. The mystic does not travel to heaven, but becomes capable of resonating with heaven's frequency. When resonance is achieved, the threshold opens, not because permission is granted, but because incompatibility has been removed. The lock has not changed. The key has been refined. This is why preparation matters absolutely, why the texts warn against presumption. A consciousness still vibrating at the frequency of earthly concerns cannot sustain the frequency of the third heaven. It will be rejected not by judgment, but by physics. Spiritual physics, but physics nonetheless. Reality appears structured. That structure appears to have requirements. The throne at the seventh heaven functions as the convergence point of all intelligences, the single source from which the seven planetary principles emanate. To approach the throne is to approach undifferentiated divine presence. before it separates into the 7 modes through which it governs manifestation. This is why the throne cannot be grasped, cannot be comprehended. It precedes comprehension. It is the condition that makes comprehension possible. The Hermetic interpretation reveals what the Hekhalot texts may encode: the 7 heavens as the architecture of consciousness itself. Not human consciousness, cosmic consciousness. The nous arranging itself in layers according to how much of itself it can manifest through increasingly limited forms. The mystic's ascent not as escape from matter, but as recognition of the principles that structure matter from within. This reading operates at the level of cosmic cognition, not personal psychology. Psychology maps the interior of the individual psyche. Cosmic cognition attempts to map the structure of intelligence as it might exist prior to individual formation. The 7 heavens in this light would not represent transient inner states, but the actual architecture through which divine intelligence descends into creation. The map functions as technical description, a working account of cosmological structure any consciousness must navigate if it seeks direct knowledge rather than received belief alone. The Jewish mystical tradition preserves the map most completely. The Hekhalot texts, the Merkabah accounts, the warnings about danger and the instructions for preparation all emphasize ascent as discipline, not devotion. The 7 heavens function as structure that can be approached, but approach requires transformation, and transformation requires method. Silence dominates these texts, sealing. The sense that knowledge this direct must be protected not from the unworthy but from the unprepared. Hermeticism articulates a parallel structure through different language: the planetary spheres, the ordered ascent through successive intelligences, the ultimate vision of the one beyond the many. The Hermetic initiate climbs what appears to be the same ladder, speaks different names at the thresholds, encounters what may be the same fundamental architecture. The Corpus Hermeticum speaks of nous ascending through the spheres, shedding the qualities imposed by each planet until only pure consciousness remains. The coordinates differ. The structure resonates. Persian cosmology layers its heavens according to fire and light. Ahura Mazda presiding over the highest heaven, lesser divinities governing the intermediate realms, and at each boundary, a test of alignment with Asha, cosmic order, truth, the law that predates creation and will survive its dissolution. The Persian mystic does not ascend through palaces, but through intensifying radiance. Yet the structure remains. 7 levels. Progressive purification. Thresholds guarded by principles that permit passage only when the ascending soul reflects their frequency. Early Christianity inherited fragments of the system: Paul's reference to the 3rd heaven, Enochian accounts of celestial hierarchies, Gnostic maps of archons guarding each sphere. But the ascent discipline was lost. Heaven became destination rather than structure. The throne became symbol rather than location. Liturgy preserved the language of heavenly courts, but forgot the method of navigation. The map survived in pieces, embedded in vision literature and apocalyptic texts, but without the practical technology that made ascent possible rather than theoretical. The resonance across traditions suggests what the comparative study of mysticism has long suspected. These may not be independent inventions, but varying accounts of similar cosmological structures, refracted through different cultural lenses, yet pointing toward congruent architecture. Different cultures, different languages, different mythic frameworks, but recurring patterns. 7 heavens, progressive intensity, thresholds requiring transformation. The Hekhalot system reveals what later tradition obscured. Ascent was never promised to all. Not because God favored some and rejected others, because the structure as described has requirements. A body unprepared for high altitude will fail at elevation, not from divine judgment, but from physics. A consciousness unprepared for divine proximity will shatter at the threshold, not from divine wrath, but from incompatibility. The 7 heavens as mapped do not exclude. They measure, they calibrate, they reveal capacity. This is why the texts emphasize danger, why they warn repeatedly against presumption, against approaching the throne without preparation, against speaking names one has not earned the right to speak. Knowledge of the map is not the same as capacity to traverse it. Knowing the structure does not grant immunity to its laws. The texts vanished from public circulation, not from conspiracy, but from necessity. Institutional religion could not accommodate a system where divine encounter depends on personal transformation rather than collective belief, where heaven resists intrusion, where proximity to God is determined not by faith, but by ontological readiness. The implications threatened every established authority. If ascent is possible, if the map is real, if the throne can be approached directly, then intermediaries become optional. Then institutions lose their monopoly on access to the divine. So the map was sealed, the texts were hidden, and heaven was transformed from encounter into doctrine, from structure into promise, from threshold into destination, guaranteed by correct belief rather than achieved through transformation. But sealing is not destruction. The map survived. Fragments in mystical lineages, echoes in philosophical systems, complete copies in hidden archives, waiting for those who would know how to read them. And the structure itself, if it functions as described, would remain embedded in reality, woven into the fabric of manifestation, indifferent to whether humanity remembers it or not. The 7 heavens would not require human acknowledgement to continue functioning. They would not be sustained by belief. The Hekhalot texts present themselves not as theology, but as cosmology, as description of how reality might actually be arranged, how consciousness might actually function, how divine presence might manifest through progressive densification and be approached through progressive refinement. A map that was no longer transmitted. The 7 heavens were never promises, they were thresholds. Not destinations, but permissions. Not rewards, but accuracies. Reality revealing itself to consciousness capable of sustaining the revelation. They remain, if they function as described, not above, suspended in some metaphysical elsewhere, but within the structure of reality itself, woven into the fabric of what is, accessible not through belief but through becoming. The throne was never distant, it was immediate. too immediate for the unprepared, too close for comfort, too present for safety. The mystics who approached it did not find God waiting at the end of a long journey. They found God pressing against them at every threshold, testing capacity, measuring readiness, allowing passage only when the vessel could contain what passage would reveal. The map remains, not hidden from those who seek it, but invisible to those who lack the eyes to see it. Not sealed by authority, but sealed by structure. And in that sealing lies the only protection consciousness ever had, not from truth itself, but from truths encountered before the vessel could hold them. The map was never withdrawn. It was sealed behind the requirement to become what the map describes, behind the necessity of transformation.